Well, here we are on our way over here in the car. Brooklyn pointed out that this is week 2. Was anyone feeling like this is more than week 2? It feels like, yeah, I'm getting some nods out there. Yeah, it's a little bit crazy. It feels weird. You're probably finding new rhythms that you feel like you have been in forever. So here we are, week 2 of broadcasting from the church. We have a bit of a studio audience again, which we're really happy to be able to do this and to be able to connect with you guys this way. I have announcements for you. A lot of them are similar to last week, but I want to point them out again just in case you did not see the announcements from last weekend. If you notice at brookviewchurch.com, when you go there, this little screen, splash screen, comes up. And if you click on that, that will have the most up-to-date information that we have in regards to our response for coronavirus and what we're doing as a church. And basically, our plan is threefold. It is to continue to connect with you via messages online. We're running kids' church programs online as well. So trying to bring the Sunday morning experience into your homes. We also have a worship playlist for you if you want to try and do some worship together as a family or as a couple or wherever you find yourself. You can go to brookviewchurch.com, and when you click on messages at the bottom of that, there's a YouTube playlist, which is video, or you can listen through Spotify if you are enjoying a podcast of the message. The second thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to gather groups online, and that is for our life groups, but also Jason has put together kind of a spontaneous Thursday night group. So if you are just looking for some familiar faces or you want to get to know some people in a new way, we just encourage you to join that Thursday evening group, and I'll tell you more about that and how to sign up for that here in just a minute. And then the last thing that we're doing is we're trying to partner with our local missions groups, the Nourishing Network and Vision House, and just kind of seeing the needs that they have and then responding to those as well. And then we're also wanting to be mindful of what are the needs in our Brookview family. And I know that many of you signed up for that last week to be notified, to be on an email distribution list. And I just want to thank you for just your generous hearts. There's not a ton for us to do right now, but we think as this kind of drags on, there likely will be. And so your support is huge. And we just love that we have a small army standing, waiting in the wings to respond whenever we say go. So thank you again for those of you that signed up. I did mention going to brookviewchurch.com and that we are hosting online kids classes on Sunday mornings, and then we'll have a toddler story time on Thursday afternoons. The way that you kind of find that information is you go to brookviewchurch.com and you click on our work, and then a little box will come up and you see Brookview Kids and Families. And when you click on that, you'll see this Kids Online, and it has the schedule of when we're meeting together, and then at the very bottom, an email that you can click on to get to me, and I'll send you a link to the Zoom meeting so that your kids can come at their age-appropriate time. And I have just been blessed to be able to gather with all of your kids. Thank you for those of you that are sharing kids with me. We had new kids come last week, and that was really special as well. We had almost 40 kids online last Sunday. And for those of you that don't know, that's a pretty big Sunday morning here at Brookview. We would be like, whoa, we were crazy with kids. And so one of my favorite things was one of our kids, I won't name any names, but his big sister was doing her class, and he decided that it would be super fun to join her class on his hoverboard in his underwear. So that happened, and it was fun. So it's an adventure, and I love every moment of it. Our life groups are actually still happening. I mentioned that most of them are online, and they started this week, and they are receiving new people into the group. I know an awkward and challenging time to get to be a part of a group, but those people are ready to welcome you, and they're postured well to do that right now. And so if you were considering joining a group and you're like, I'm just going to wait till the spring quarter when things slow down, we want you to sign up for one of those groups. And so those groups meet weekly throughout the week, and you are going to do that, you'll sign up on your online communication card, which is the next thing in the announcements. You go to brookviewchurch.com and you click on Contact up there. And then this screen comes up and you click on that blue box that says click here to fill out our online communication card. And that takes you to this here. And you have an opportunity to fill out your name, your email address, a way for us to contact you. And then there's all sorts of boxes there, and you probably can't see them all. Maybe you can. I don't know how well this video is. Our video guy is awesome, so maybe he's getting it all. But I'll tell you some of the stuff on there that you'll see that you could check any box that applies to you, and that will come to us, and we will get you the information that you need. It's really small for me, so I'm going to have to, do that. The first one is joining Pastor Jason's Thursday at 6:45 online group. Jason met with a group last Thursday, and it was from 7 to 8 p.m. And we realized that there were more people that wanted to be a part of that group, and Jason wants it to be really personal, where you can kind of talk a little bit. It's not that you're just listening to a next message from him, but you're actually diving deeper into the subject matter of whatever he spoke about the last week. And so he split that now into 2 one-hour sessions. And so there's 2 different ones for you to sign up for. Thursday at 6:45 to 7:45, and then he needs a little potty break. So 8 o'clock till 9 o'clock is the next one. And so check that box if that's for you. And then I'd like a link to Kids Church Zoom meetings is something that you can ask for. I want to join a weekly life group. I want to help at Brookview. So you can kind of read those things. And then if you scroll down even further, there's comments there. You can type in prayer requests that you have, things that are going on with you. And we have a team of people that pray for you throughout the week. And we would just love to hear from you on anything that we can be praying for. Underneath that comments and prayer requests section, there's this COVID-19 season response. And we want to know, are you someone who's in need of assistance, or do you know someone who is? And we would like to see what we can do to rally around anyone who needs something in this season. So that's the place that you go for that. And then if you are in this spot where you're like, I don't really have any needs, but if needs arise, and I talked about that earlier, I'd like to be a part of the distribution list of people that know what's going on and can respond to those needs. And those are in 3 different arenas: our Brookview family, the Nourishing Network, that's meals for Edmonds School District's kids, and then Vision House, which is helping with homelessness in our community here. And then you just hit submit, and that goes into us, and then we respond to you throughout the week. So the last thing that I want to point out at brookviewchurch.com is the reality that you can give online, or if you'd like to send a check in the mail, our mailing address is also at the bottom of that page there. And there's also a place for you, for those of you that know, we're helping the Nourishing Network right now with a drive for canned soup, chili, and oatmeal packets. And some of you are like, I'm not going to any grocery stores to drop stuff off at the church. If that's you, that's fine, and we would love to get your donations here at the church. But for some of you, are like, could I just give somebody some money and they could go shop? And we have people that will shop if you want to donate. And so there's a link for you to be able to do that. That's all that I have. And next up is Jason.
Okay, guys, I want to start with a little personal question. Don't respond out loud. Well, maybe you want to respond out loud. All 8 of you. What's it been like only seeing a very limited number of people in your life these days? Like, how has that felt? How has it been different? What do you miss? What do you like? How does it feel? Like, for many of us who aren't going to work, or we're working from home right now, it's for many of us only our immediate family. And so hopefully we like them because we are seeing a lot of each other. And for some who live alone, this is a really hard season. Very little face-to-face relationship, very little like social connection and interaction. But for those of us that have 4 or 5 or 7 or 8 or 10 of us at home, there is community, but man, we are seeing a lot of each other. Amen? Amen. And so these days, I think many of us are gaining a new perspective on community, what it is, why it's important, how much we take it for granted. And today, I want us to just think about the importance of community. How can we foster it, and how can we protect it? Because it turns out human beings don't actually thrive very well in isolation. And our God is a God of community. Like, he doesn't just enjoy community. In a sense, God himself is community. I mean, when you think about it, he has existed eternally in 3 persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. And so God values community in part because God in his very nature is community. So in this time when our normal rhythms for community are all out of whack, I want us to think about the beauty of community. And I want to start today with just a little interactive quiz. When animals of the same kind are in a group, we often have a designated name for that. So let's have a little quiz and see what we know. Keller, I hope you watch some Animal Planet. I'm counting on you for this. Just to build some confidence, we're going to start with some easier ones. So what do you call, when they're in a group together, what do you call a group of wolves? A pack. Excellent. Okay, what do you call a group of sheep? Whoa, we seem to have some dispute going on in here. What is a group of sheep? It's a flock. It is a flock. You know what? I love the confidence. It doesn't always equal, competence. But okay, how about this one? Confident one. What do you call a group of elephants together? A herd. Okay, there's your herd. What do you call a group of lions? A pride. Excellent. Okay, and we're going to move to some tougher ones. So gear up. What do you call a group of geese together? A gaggle. That's right, they're a gaggle. How about a group of crows together? A murder. A murder. We have someone that was all over that one. A murder of crows. How bad is that? Like a murder of crows. Okay, how about you got a group of whales all together? A pod. Excellent. How about, I'm curious if anyone knows this one. What do you call a group of rhinos together? Rhinos, rhinoceroses. Death. Ouch. Anybody? Brian, come on. Google, no? This is awesome. A group of rhinos together is called a crash. It's a crash. Okay, one last one. This one's really tough. What do you call a group of porcupines together? A quill? That's close. A group of porcupines together is called a prickle. A prickle. And so now I want to talk a little bit about porcupines. The North American porcupine, do we have that guy? My trusty, there it is. Look at that guy. The North American porcupine has around 30,000 quills. 30,000. and each quill can be driven deep into an enemy. How about that guy? Each quill can be driven deep into an enemy, and what will happen is the enemy's body heat will cause the microscopic barbs on the quill to expand so that each quill is firmly embedded. Those wounds can fester, and the more dangerous wounds, like the ones affecting vital organs, can actually be fatal. Now, porcupines, as it turns out, are not real big on community. They don't snuggle together a lot or play or frolic all that much. But once a year, porcupines get a strong urge for community. Late in the fall, okay, a porcupine's attention turns to love. But if you think about it, love is kind of risky business when you're a porcupine. Thank you. I agree. So it turns out, get this, that lady porcupines are open to dinner and a movie only once a year, and it turns out that female porcupines are only sexually receptive for 8 to 12 hours per year. So if you are a male porcupine, when it comes time, you better make your move, man. You need to be bold, but you also need to proceed with caution. Because a girl porcupines know is the most widely respected turndown in the entire animal kingdom. So in love and community, porcupines face this dilemma. How do you get close without getting hurt? And if we can be honest, this is a very human dilemma. Because the truth is, human beings are designed to live in community. We need it. We are designed to thrive only if engaged in meaningful relationships. But getting close to other people is tricky, right? It's risky. Because the truth is, we're all flawed, we're all broken, we're all fallen, and none of us is perfectly whole. We're all just a little bit prickly. Several years ago, John Ortberg, one of my favorite authors, wrote a book, and I love his title. His title for this book was Everybody's Normal. Everybody's normal till you get to know them. And he kind of opens the book with this, and I love this. He says, in certain stores, you will find a section of merchandise available at greatly reduced prices. The tip-off is a particular tag you will see on all the items in that area. Each tag carries the words, as is. This is a euphemistic way of saying, these are damaged goods. Sometimes they're called slightly irregular. The store is giving you fair warning. This is the department of something's gone wrong. You're about to find a flaw here. A stain that won't come out, a zipper that won't zip, a button that won't butt. There will be a problem. These items are not normal. We're not going to tell you where the flaw is. You're going to have to look for it. But we know it's there. So when you find it, and you will find it, don't come whining and sniveling to us. Because there is a fundamental rule when dealing with merchandise in this corner of the store. No returns, no refunds, no exchanges. If you were looking for perfection, you walked down the wrong aisle. You have received fair warning. If you want this item, there is only one way to obtain it. You must take it as is. Now he continues and he says, when you deal with human beings, you have come to the as-is corner of the universe. Think for a moment about someone in your life, maybe the person you know best, love most. That person is slightly irregular. Of course, the most painful part of this is realizing that I am in the as-is department as well. Throughout human history, human beings have resisted owning up to that little tag. We try to separate the world into normal, people like us, and difficult people. So, can we just admit something? Like, we all got issues. We're all a little bit prickly. Sometimes we're insincere. Sometimes we're too sensitive. Sometimes we're arrogant. Sometimes we're controlling. Sometimes we're grumpy. We all have barbs that can be cast into an enemy at any moment. But the really sad thing is, we don't just cast them into enemies. We cast them into, sometimes, the people we love most. On the flip side, they cast them into us as well. And so real human relationships are always, in a sense, a porcupine dance. And yet, the yearning to attach and connect and belong, their yearning to love and be loved, is the fiercest longing of the soul. So as frustrating as people can be, it's hard to find a good substitute. And in this season, many of us are cooped up tightly with a few other people. And for most of us, it's the people in this world that we love most. It's our spouse, it's our kids, it's our brothers and sisters. It's the kind of community that's most central to us. But day after day after day, it's the same people in the same place. It's the same people in the same place. You guys, this week there was a new record set, and I find this kind of stunning. It almost went unnoticed, but it's really such a sign of the times. And here's the record. This past week, I set a personal record for time spent in my slippers. Yes. Like staff meeting, like slippers, just slippers everywhere. Staff meeting on Zoom, slippers, baby. My men's group, I'm in my slippers. Sermon prep, slippers. And so these are strange times. It's kind of just like out of body, slippers every day. But also, I'm seeing mostly the same people, hour after hour, day after day. Now it's getting to be week after week. And these are some of my favorite people, but man, it's a lot. And I know that for some of you, it's the same. And that means that we are packed together with other flawed, prickly people. So today, I want us to think about managing conflict and anger. And we are going to look at some very famous words of Jesus on this. But before we dive into his words, I want to get a little context. Because prior to all of this craziness, we were in this series called The Mountain. Like, does anyone remember that? Seems like forever ago. We were looking at that time at the most famous sermon of Jesus. We're looking at what's known as the Sermon on the Mount, the most influential words ever uttered in human history. And then we canceled church for a week while we tried to figure this all out. And then last week I did a message called Walking Through Uncertainty, which was amazing. And it was about walking through life when it just feels out of control. But in thinking about human anger and human relationships and all that so many of us are dealing with right now, I want to get back to the Sermon on the Mount because Jesus had some awesome stuff to say about anger and bitterness and all of the emotions that many of us feel at times. So real quick, let me recap some important stuff to get back to the context. And I know that for those of you that tuned into the first 3 messages of this series, which also I would, if you didn't watch them, you should. I know that those of you who saw those, this is review for you. But I also am in a spot where I can't even remember what I talked about a month ago. So let me just recap kind of where we were at and get us all caught up in the next minute or two. Here's the backdrop for the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has been healing people all over Palestine. He's restoring sight to the blind. He's giving hearing back to the deaf. He's healing people of leprosy and all kinds of diseases. He's casting out demons. He's delivering people. And he goes from place to place doing this. And then after he does the healings, he would always stop to teach. And the theme of his message was always the same. We're told by Matthew that it was always about the kingdom of God. And he kept saying to the crowds everywhere he went, okay, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. And he was announcing some very good news. He was announcing the gospel, that life together with God, in God's favor, in God's presence, that life has now become available on earth to ordinary people. Because of my life and my presence with you, Jesus would say, It is now among you, and it is available to you. And so people wanted to know, well, who can be a part of this? Who is eligible to experience this and enter into this? And so one day, in the midst of a full day of healing and delivering people, Jesus goes up on a hillside and he sits down to teach. And he says some shocking things about who's eligible for this, about who it is that can be blessed. He says stuff like, blessed are the poor in spirit. Okay, blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. In other words, it's not just the rich and successful and spiritually educated. But he was saying, blessed now are the people that everybody assumed were cursed by God. Blessed are the people everyone assumed God had just kind of written off. The sick and the diseased and the meek and the broken and the unspiritual. And the point is, the kingdom is here, and it is available to anyone at all. Anyone can start to live a kingdom kind of life. Anyone at all can begin to acknowledge God. Anyone can be forgiven and start a new life, a life characterized by dependence on God, a life that shares God's values, a life devoted to God's purposes. Now, we listen to that, we go, well, that's all great, that sounds good, but what would that actually look like in real life? I mean, how would someone live that out in their normal, everyday life? And thankfully, this is kind of cool, that's what the rest of Jesus' talk was all about. The rest of the sermon is simply examples or pictures or illustrations of how a person with a heart aligned with God's might actually live, how they might deal with stuff like marriage and money and worry, how they might deal with their enemies or injustice or fear. And so Jesus kind of goes rapid fire through all these real life topics. And the very first real life topic that he addresses, the very first issue he deals with when it comes to this new life with God in God's presence, the very first illustration he gives concerns anger and conflict. And so here we go. Let's dive into it. Jesus says to the crowds on the hillside that day, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." So Jesus has been talking about the kingdom of God being present here on earth, that it's everywhere around us, that it is available to us every moment, that if we begin to perceive it and somehow align ourselves with it, stunning things are actually possible. And so he now starts to explain how this might affect anger. He's saying, okay, you are being invited into a different kind of life, a life defined by love and peace. But if you think that love is just about murder avoidance, you're sadly mistaken. He's like, murder avoidance is kind of a low bar when it comes to love, don't you think? Now, sometimes people get hung up on how harsh Jesus is here about anger, because he says, "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." And sometimes people hear that and just naturally think, oh my goodness, Jesus says, if I ever get mad at anyone, God is going to send me to hell. So let me just say, that is not what he's saying, okay? So, that's good. He's saying that experiencing the kingdom of God is possible right now. The kingdom isn't just some far-off future place that you go when you die. There's more of the kingdom to come in the future for sure, and crossing over after death is all a part of that. But the kingdom is actually available to experience right here, right now. And that happens when our will gets aligned with God's will, when we learn to walk intimately with him, and when his values become ours and we begin to live out those values. It happens when we begin to act in concert with God to change things. When we look at aspects of this world that aren't right and we work together with God through the power of God, through the power of the Holy Spirit to change them. When we work to bring heaven to earth, then that's kingdom life. But see, when we allow anger to fester and then we feed it, we allow anger to sprout into contempt and hatred, then we can be sure that we no longer share the heart of God, that we're no longer living or entering into the kingdom kind of life. Not only does God oppose murder, it turns out he opposes anything that damages human community. So Jesus continues. Here's all of verse 22 now. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, "Raka," is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, I don't know about you. As far as I know, I have never said "Raka" to anyone. So thankfully, I'm good to go on this one. Okay, here's the deal with that. The Aramaic word, "Raka," is a word that doesn't translate well into English. So it's like the word "amen" doesn't translate well into English. So most English translations just keep the original word "amen." Most English translations just keep it in the original Aramaic. But the Aramaic word "Raka" is an onomatopoeia. Okay, so this is the second time in this series we're talking about this, which is exciting. If you were here with us a few weeks ago, we came across a Greek onomatopoeia, and you may remember the word was patokos, a Greek onomatopoeia. So an onomatopoeia is a word that sounds like what it's describing. Okay, and we have lots of these. We have lots of these in English too. Okay, there's boom, crash, bang. There's growl. Okay, whisper. There's hiss. You with me? Good. So a few weeks ago, we came across the Greek word patokos. And Jesus was talking about the poor in spirit, and the word used there is the patokos in spirit. So the word translated poor there was an onomatopoeia, and it was used for the word poor because it sounded like patokos, like spitting on someone. So Jesus was saying, okay, the poor in spirit are those that are so poor and so broken that they are the most spit upon. Well, here Jesus says, hey, don't get so mad that you say to anyone, "Raka." And here again, we have an ancient onomatopoeia. This time, it's Aramaic. And again, this word sounds like something having to do with spitting, but it's worse. Okay, so Dallas Willard, a professor at USC, former professor, the late Dallas Willard, professor at USC, says this about the word. And I love the way that he uses scholarly language to describe spitting on people. But check this out, and I quote, he says, "Raka, it may have originated from the sound one makes to collect spittle from the throat in order to spit." So that's good, like collecting spittle from the throat in order to spit, which Dallas, in this quote, he sounds like he's British or something. He's actually American. But he's saying the word "raka" originated from the sound you might make if you were getting ready to hawk a loogie. Raka. And so it's a raka. And then you spit it in someone's face. Okay? So now that is downright disgusting. But in the ancient world, spitting in someone's face was a huge statement. It was degrading, and it indicated a tremendous amount of hate being leveraged at somebody. And we saw that last week when Jesus was being crucified. When Jesus was being crucified and he was being insulted and all that, what else did the religious leaders do? Anybody? They spit in his face. They spit in his face, we see, even while he was being crucified. And so you just think about that and go, man, the ancient world was brutal. So Jesus is saying, okay, that emotion, that kind of anger, it's never good. When you get that angry and that hateful, it does damage. So that's not kingdom life. That's the kind of heart and attitude that destroys community. Jesus says, now think about this. He says, we're going back to Matthew 5:22. He says, and anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, if you're sitting here thinking, whoa, I never said raka at anybody, but I do think I called somebody a fool one time. Like, am I going to hell? The answer is, that's not the point. Okay, the point is when we stop looking at people with grace and compassion, when we start thinking of people as idiots or morons, or you fill in the blank of whatever word you would use there, it prevents us from loving them. Now, in our culture, like to call somebody a fool, it's just not that big of a deal. It's like calling them a nerd or something. Like in our culture, nerd, like the word nerd can actually be kind of endearing. Like a girl can flirt with a guy, right? And she's like, this is probably, Jane, what you did with Mike. It's probably like, oh, stop it, you big nerd. Right? Isn't that how it worked? And so fool for us sort of carries the same weight as nerd. Like if you're really upset with someone, you probably don't call them a fool. But in Jewish culture, calling somebody a fool was big time. It was a major insult. It was more like calling somebody a bleeping idiot. Fools were people that had lost their way. They were people that had lost their sense of what was right, of God and of all common sense and wisdom. They were so out of touch with what's healthy that they were a detriment to themselves and others. And so you think about that famous Hebrew proverb from the Bible, one of my favorites. As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. What do fools do? Well, they just keep eating their own vomit. And if you're thinking, man, like, you're getting crass and disgusting today, I just want to say, I'm just teaching the Bible. The Bible's graphic, man. And so here's the point. Calling someone a fool was not a cute way to flirt. It was a horrible label that put somebody in a terrible box. And Jesus says, okay, when you start doing that with people, your heart's in danger. When we start writing each other off and labeling each other, that's when community gets damaged. It's when people stop loving each other. That's when grace stops being extended. That's when healing and reconciliation, they become impossible. And when that happens to community, okay, it breaks God's heart. That's never God's will for people. And yet we've all seen that happen. And I just want to give you a little bit of a heartfelt example from my life. A few years ago, my mom and my stepdad both passed away within a few months of each other, actually. And now they divorced when I was 10, and really from within a couple of years of that had no contact with each other. They hadn't talked with each other in decades, and yet they both passed away within just a few months of each other. And when that happened, and they both passed away like that, I started thinking a lot about our little family that used to be. And I remember when they were married and we were this little family, they used to do this thing all the time. Families have their own kind of weird things, and this was our own little weird thing, and it was cheesy, but I really liked it. When I was, 4, 5, 6 years old, one of them would just kind of say, usually after dinner, one of them would say, hey, let's make a bologna sandwich. And so my mom and my dad would be the bread, and I would be the bologna. And just kind of, it was basically like a three-way hug with little tiny Jason in the middle of it. Now, I know that that's super cheesy, but when I was little, I liked it. And the three of us were like really happy for a long time. My mom had married my stepdad when I was 2. She started dating him before I was even a year old. And so that is all that I had ever known. And we were very happy together. And then at some point, they just started to fight a lot. And my mom was a screamer. And when she'd start yelling, like, I couldn't stand it. So I'd usually like go outside and shoot baskets and just hope that the sound of the ball bouncing and crashing off of the hoop and all that would just drown it out. And then one day when I was 10, my mom called a family meeting, and she announced that she and I were moving away, that she was going to divorce my stepdad, and that changed everything. There was no more little family. And I'll tell you what, that was crazy hard for me. But looking back, I mostly feel bad for them. I mostly feel bad for them. My stepdad never remarried. He never had that kind of a connection again. In his final years, he moved to Pennsylvania to be around some other family, which meant I couldn't be with him and I couldn't see him, and he died in Pennsylvania. And my mom married a couple more times. Both were brief and both were lifeless disasters, really. And she finished her life a very lonely woman. She died alone. She lived alone. She died alone. In fact, the only way that anyone even knew that she was missed or that something had happened was she missed an appointment with her psychiatrist. And so her psychiatrist called the fire department to do a well check, and then they called me, and when I arrived, they explained to me that she must have died alone in her apartment. And so that got me thinking about our little family that was no more. And I thought about the two of them being so lonely and eventually just dying without each other. And I thought about how it could have been. Like, what if somehow they could have worked through things? What if there could have been some grace and some reconciliation and some communication? And I'll tell you what, here's what I think. I think God deeply grieved the loss of that little tiny community. I think God grieved the way that both of them finished out their lives. I don't think it was God's will for either of them to go like that. But when conflict and anger escalate unchecked, human community always suffers. Longtime friendships and potential friendships never form. Families become isolated. Co-workers can't work together. Business partnerships end. Parents and children stop talking to each other. Parents and brothers and sisters become disconnected and bitter. And every single time it happens, God's heart aches. So Jesus is giving a stern warning here. He's saying, you better be careful with anger. You better be careful with anger. And then he gives us two very earthy, very practical examples. He gives us two illustrations of conflict management, two different ideas about how kingdom people might go about things. Here's the first one. He says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Now, it's really important that we understand in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus isn't giving us like more legalism, like the 10 Commandments and all the Old Testament commandments just more amplified. He's not giving us hard and fast rules to follow. He's not saying something here like, hey, you know what? You can't ever go to church and worship God until you've gone out into the world and repaired every broken relationship that you've ever had in your life. That would be ridiculous. The point here is that spiritual life lived through rituals is not to be done instead of spiritual life done in relationships. To engage in spiritual activities is good, and it's life-giving, and it's essential, but if it's done to the neglect of human relationships, something is going horribly wrong. To keep doing a bunch of religious routines, but at the same time ignore relational breakdown in your life, that just doesn't make any sense. And Jesus makes a great point here. When something goes haywire, somebody needs to step up and start a conversation. Somebody needs to say, okay, something feels off, and I would like for us to get back on track if we can. Somebody needs to care enough to take some initiative. But here's what I think most of us, if not all of us, prefer to do. We have a situation where somebody's been wounded, and we think, well, let them come to me. Let them come to me. I mean, if they think that I've wounded them, then let them make the first move. Let them come to me. And if it's me that's been wounded, like if I'm the one that's been wounded, then I tend to think, well, you know what? They're the one that hurt me. They should apologize to me. Let them make the first move. Let them come to me. But Jesus is saying, here's what kingdom people do with conflict. They take initiative. They take initiative to talk it out and to work it out. They do it with grace. They do it with sensitivity. They do it with humility. They take responsibility for their own part of the problem. They ask a lot of questions and really listen. They take initiative. They seek reconciliation, and they seek healing. And I'll tell you what, I have been so thankful for people in our church that have done this with me. We have some very good friends in this church that are so good about this. And over the years, I've said things or done things that have been hurtful to them, and they've been wounded. And they could have just walked away, just left a relationship with me and with this community, with this family together. But they've come to me again and again, because unfortunately, I've done this again and again, and they've talked it out a couple different times. And I'm so incredibly thankful for that. And they are such good friends to me. And then I think about my relationship with Jen, with my wife. Some of you see us and you think, you look at us and you just think, I don't know, I have no idea what you guys actually think. But sometimes people will look at pastors and assume, their wives are so lucky. Like they hit the jackpot. That guy must be amazing. That guy must be an amazing husband, and that guy must be an amazing father, and that guy must be an amazing bricklayer. I don't know, we're just amazing at everything. But I'll tell you what, my wife actually puts up with a lot. In fact, I can do really dumb stuff without even knowing it, and so thankfully, she brings it to my attention. And to be honest, one of the hallmarks of our marriage has been truth. When there are issues, we talk them out. And I'll tell you what, sometimes that's been really hard. In fact, the first few years of our marriage, and I've mentioned this many times throughout our time at Brookview, the first few years of our marriage were hell at times. It seemed like we had a major discussion and confrontation and big thing to work through every day. And it was exhausting. I remember going to bed all the time just feeling defeated. I'd go to bed and I think, oh God, this is impossible. Oh God, she's impossible. And Jen would be so upset that she couldn't sleep. And so we would just kind of be separate. And so eventually I would lay in bed by myself and I would pray. And eventually I would sense God saying to me, get up, you idiot. Don't give up on this. Go talk to her. Take some initiative. And I would go back to her with a little bit better attitude, a little bit more open. And I would take a lot more responsibility for my role in whatever was the problem. And inevitably, she would move my way a little bit. And I would understand her heart a little better, and she would understand me a little better. And over time, those conversations became less and less frequent, thank God. And we started to get into kind of a groove. And now those conversations are really, really rare. They still happen sometimes. I don't look forward to them. But we are committed to having them. And here's the big payoff. After years of doing this, years of learning how to love each other, she is absolutely my best friend in the world. There is nobody that I would rather spend time with than her. But for those first few years, it was incredibly rough. And yet, because one of us consistently took initiative, conversations happened and healing happened. And it's amazing what can happen when somebody is willing to take initiative. And that leads to Jesus' second very tangible illustration. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way. Or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. So in Jesus' second illustration, he says, here's the scenario. Let's say this conflict has gotten legs. Let's say it's turning into a big court dispute. Here's a crazy idea. What if you went and tried to talk it out instead of going to court? Because if you can't work this out, it might get really ugly. Now, is it me or is this just like common sense? Because Jesus is saying if you sit back in anger and then you just let them sit back in anger and the two of you just get more and more angry, this might get really expensive and this might get really ugly. So how about you try talking it out? Like, who knows, you might be able to work it out. Now, because we tend to love legalism as Christians, there's a real tendency to read what Jesus said there this way. It's wrong to ever go to court or be involved in the legal process. And there are Christians that will let people do horrible things, walk all over them in ways that are completely unjust, people that lose rights to their children and so forth because they refuse to engage in legal matters because they think Jesus has forbidden it. That is not what Jesus is saying. The point is not that it's wrong to go to court. The point is anger and conflict tend to escalate. And if you don't cut it off and deal with it, who knows where it might end up? So why not take some initiative before the whole thing blows up? And this is how anger and bitterness and even like annoyance work. If they go unchecked, they tend to escalate. And when they escalate, they damage community. They damage families, marriages, friendships. They damage workplaces, teams, neighborhoods, staff rooms, homeowners associations. They damage every kind of human community. So in order to protect what matters most, we have to be willing to take initiative. So I want to just kind of close this message with a very simple question. What in your life needs you to take initiative? Like, has somebody wounded you? Have you wounded someone? Are you finding yourself annoyed with someone a lot? Are you finding yourself angry or maybe bitter? If you let it fester, or even worse, if you feed it, what might it damage? Like, are you throwing quills at someone in your life right now? Maybe it's the quills of sarcasm, or maybe it's criticism, or maybe you're just kind of giving them the cold shoulder, giving them a little silent treatment. Or maybe it's worse, very angry, very hurtful words. But bitterness and anger and even annoyance can do real damage. And so, what in your life needs you to take initiative? This is such a strange season, to be sure. Like, so much time cooped up. And for me, that means a ton of time in slippers. But it's also a lot of time for like negative emotions to just build up. And about a few weeks ago, about 2.5 weeks ago, I had a lot of stuff going on in me. I felt like, I think like many people, just deeply uncertain about the future, deeply uncertain about the economy and what kind of effect that's going to have on our church and our family, and uncertain about public health, uncertain about the state of our church, just uncertain. And then I also had all this disappointment, stuff that I was really looking forward to, and all it was just more and more of it was just getting canceled. And then I felt kind of out of body without just normal routines and all of that stuff. There was no gym time. There was no meetings with like live people. There was no getting out. And then there was this stress of, oh my goodness, what are we going to do for church? Like, what are we going to do? How are we possibly going to walk through this time with people together in community? And I just felt all of this inadequacy boiling up. Like, am I a good leader? Like, maybe I'm not innovative enough. Maybe I'm not creative enough. Maybe I'm not gifted enough to lead us through this season. Maybe I'm just not enough. So I had all of these, this storm of emotions inside of me. And I felt this heaviness. And here's what I've learned about myself. When I feel like a heaviness or I feel really stressed, joyful people are super annoying. Does this happen to anyone else? Yes. So here was my dilemma. I was feeling heavy. I'm feeling all this stress, and yet I live with the most joy-filled human being that I have ever met. And her name is Brooklyn, and she's 13, and she is like pure sunshine. She's mostly smiley and giggly, and she's like the most smiley, giggly human being that I've ever met. And it's sincere, and it's like a really, really good thing. But about a week ago, it was driving me insane. I mean, I was like wrapped in this cloud of heaviness, and then Brooklyn would be giggling and dancing and bouncing around the house and so you guys, I was getting so annoyed. I was actually feeling kind of mean. And I had this temptation, this temptation to just throw barbs at her, to just get prickly and hit her with some quills. Like, we got to make this thing stop. But if I really thought about it, I'm like, I don't want to do that to her. Like, I don't. And really, I shouldn't need to make her feel all of my heaviness. That's ridiculous. That's not fair to her. So I needed to take a little bit of anger initiative. And the first thing for me was to just ask God, what is going on with me? What's going on with me? And it became obvious that I needed to let go of some stuff. I needed to deal with some fear, and I needed to deal with inadequacy, and I needed to deal with disappointment and a little bit of just grief. So much was out of my control. But you know what wasn't out of my control was the way that I treat this 13-year-old girl that I dearly love. And so God has walked me through some stuff. And it's better. And rather than me pulling her into my darkness, mostly she's pulling me into her joy. I'm doing a lot more dancing these days. I'm doing a lot more laughing these days. I'm just being silly. We're using more weird words and weird sounds, all kinds of stuff at our house. It's getting weird. But actually, I think I need to start getting out with other people because I'm getting too comfortable with these people and we're getting weird. But it's kind of fun. And so in a lot of ways it's gotten better. But also I realized, okay, I do need to have a conversation with her. I like the joy and I like the dancing, but not at the dinner table. At the dinner table. So Jen and I have been working on this thing at the dinner table because we'd just be sitting there eating our meal. We're having a very adult conversation about coronavirus and the number of deaths in America. And Brooklyn's like, and so Jen and I, at first, we were like, what are we going to do? Well, wouldn't it be funny if every time she danced at the table, we just stopped whatever we were doing, and we just danced too? So pretty soon, all three of us are just like this. Every time we see Brooklyn, we're just freaking out at the table. Jen's doing the YMCA. And we thought it would work, and it didn't work. Brooklyn's like, yay, you're with me in this. So we had to have a conversation, like, babe, we don't feel like you're, part of the family when we're having a serious conversation and you're doing that. So it's getting much better. Yes, and I'm much less interested in throwing barbs. And so let me end with this. Real human relationships are always a porcupine dance. They just are. We all have barbs that can be cast into an enemy at any moment, and the really sad thing is we don't just cast them into our enemies. Right? We cast them into the people that we love most. And sometimes they cast them into us. And when that starts happening, somebody's got to do something. So again, my closing question for you is this. When it comes to anger and negativity and bitterness, what is it in your life that needs you to take some initiative? You don't want to just let it go because there's way too much on the line.